Detective Ray Morrison had always prided himself on his instincts. 23 years on the force, and his gut had never steered him wrong. Until now, sitting in his cramped apartment on a rainy Thursday evening, staring at a manila folder that should have stayed buried in the precinct's cold case archives. The Brennan murder. Case closed 3 years ago. Open and shut, the department had called it. Morrison had called it that too back then. But something had been gnawing at him since retirement, like a splinter working its way deeper under the skin. The folder lay open on his kitchen table, crime scene photos scattered between empty beer bottles and takeout containers. Sarah Brennan, 26, found dead in her downtown apartment. Single gunshot to the chest. Her boyfriend, Marcus Wells, had been arrested within 48 hours. Motive, jealousy, evidence, his prints on the murder weapon, witnesses placing him at the scene, and a history of domestic disputes. Morrison lit his third cigarette of the hour and studied the photos again. Something about the blood spatter pattern had always bothered him, but the case had moved fast. Too fast, maybe. The DA had been hungry for a conviction, the media was all over it, and Wells had a record. Everything pointed to him, except for the nagging voice in Morrison's head that whispered, "What if you got it wrong?" He grabbed his laptop and pulled up the case files he'd copied before leaving the force. Officially, he wasn't supposed to have them. Unofficially, every cop kept copies of cases that haunted them. Morrison scrolled through witness statements, forensic reports, and interview transcripts until his eyes burned. The first crack in the foundation came from an unlikely source: social media. Morrison had never been much for Facebook or Instagram, but retirement had given him time to explore the digital world his younger colleagues navigated effortlessly. Sarah Brennan's profile was still active, maintained by her sister as a memorial. Scrolling through her posts from the weeks before her death, Morrison found something that made his blood run cold. A photo from 2 weeks before the murder showed Sarah at a coffee shop with a man Morrison didn't recognize. The caption read, "Finally found someone who gets my weird sense of humor. Thanks for the laugh, stranger." The man was tall, well-dressed, with dark hair and an easy smile. He wasn't Marcus Wells. Morrison screenshot the photo and dove deeper into Sarah's digital footprint. More pictures emerged, the same man at a bookstore, at a park, always in the background of Sarah's photos, but never tagged, never identified. Someone she'd been seeing on the side, maybe. Someone the investigation had missed. The retired detective felt his pulse quicken. This was the feeling he'd chased for over 2 decades. The moment when a case cracked open like an egg, revealing the truth hidden inside. But accessing more information would require resources Morrison no longer had. He couldn't walk into the precinct and start asking questions without raising suspicions. He needed help, and he knew exactly who to call. Detective Maria Santos answered on the second ring. She'd been Morrison's partner for his last 5 years on the force, a sharp investigator with a hunger for justice that reminded him of his younger self. "Ray, it's been 6 months since you called. I need a favor, Santos, a big one. Let me guess, you're bored out of your mind and want to play detective again." Morrison's tone grew serious. "The Brennan case, I think we got it wrong." Silence stretched between them before Santos spoke again. "Ray, that case is closed," Wells confessed. After 12 hours of interrogation and a promise of a plea deal, "Look, I know how this sounds, but I found something. Sarah was seeing someone else before she died. Someone we never identified. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the evidence. Wells' prints were on the gun. What if someone else put that gun in his hands? Another pause. Morrison could hear the familiar sounds of the precinct in the background. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the controlled chaos of police work. "What do you need?" Santos finally asked. "Run the photo through facial recognition. See if our mystery man has a record. Ray ... 24 hours. Give me 24 hours to prove I'm not losing my mind." Santos sighed. "Send me the photo. But if this turns into nothing, you owe me dinner at that expensive place you always talked about trying." Morrison emailed the screenshot and waited. While facial recognition software did its work, he returned to the physical evidence. The crime scene photos showed Sarah's apartment in meticulous detail. Overturned furniture, broken glass, signs of a struggle. But one detail caught his attention that he'd overlooked 3 years ago. Sarah's laptop was missing from the crime scene but had been found in Marcus Wells' car during his arrest. At the time, it had seemed like more evidence of his guilt. Now Morrison wondered, what if someone had planted it there? He pulled out the forensic analysis of the laptop. Most of Sarah's files had been routine, work documents, photos, social media, but buried in the technical report was a detail that made Morrison's hands shake. Recently deleted files that had been partially recovered. Email drafts, unsent messages to someone with the username Bookworm Brown. The fragments were minimal, but they painted a picture of a woman scared for her life. "I can't keep doing this. Told me he'd hurt Marcus if I said anything. Going to the police tomorrow." Morrison's cigarette burned down to his fingers, but he barely noticed the pain. Sarah Brennan hadn't been killed by a jealous boyfriend. She'd been silenced by someone who had a lot more to lose than Marcus Wells ever did. His phone buzzed. "Santos, your mystery man has a name, David Brown. Real estate developer, married, no criminal record. But Ray, there's something else. Brown was a person of interest in 2 other cases, women who died under suspicious circumstances in the past 5 years. Both cases went cold." Morrison felt the familiar rush of a breakthrough, tempered by the weight of what it meant. Marcus Wells had spent 3 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. 3 years of his life stolen because Morrison and his team had been too eager to close a case and move on to the next one. "Where is Brown now?" Morrison asked. "That's the problem. He disappeared 2 weeks ago. Told his wife he was going on a business trip, but there's no record of any travel arrangements. His credit cards haven't been used. His phone's been turned off." Morrison's blood ran cold. He knows someone's on to him. Or he's dead. Could be this whole thing is bigger than we thought. Morrison made a decision that would have gotten him fired if he was still on the force. "I'm going to find him." "Ray, you can't. You're not a cop anymore. You have no authority, no backup, no jurisdiction." "I have something better than that. I have the truth." Morrison hung up and began packing. If David Brown was still alive, Morrison would find him. If he was dead, Morrison would find who killed him. Either way, Marcus Wells was going home. The trail led Morrison to Brown's real estate office first. The building was mostly empty at night, but Morrison had learned a few tricks during his decades in law enforcement. Security systems could be bypassed if you knew what you were looking for, and old habits died hard. Brown's office was pristine, almost sterile. No personal photos, no clutter, nothing that suggested a human being actually worked there. Morrison searched through filing cabinets and desk drawers, finding nothing but standard business documents and contracts. Then he found a safe. It was hidden behind a painting of a mountain landscape, because even criminal masterminds apparently couldn't resist cliches. Morrison didn't have the combination, but he did have time and a crowbar he'd borrowed from his car's emergency kit. Inside the safe, USB drives, photographs, and documents that painted a picture of systematic blackmail and murder. David Brown hadn't just killed Sarah Brennan. He'd been running a sophisticated operation targeting women, gaining their trust, then using them for information about their wealthy or powerful connections. The photographs showed Brown with at least a dozen different women over the past 5 years. Some Morrison recognized from cold cases that had never been solved. Others were still alive as far as he knew. One USB drive contained audio recordings, conversations between Brown and his victims, threats disguised as pillow talk, confessions extracted through manipulation and fear. Sarah Brennan's voice was on several files, trembling as she revealed details about her job at a high-end accounting firm, client information that Brown was using for insider trading and corporate espionage. Morrison felt sick. This wasn't just about murder. It was about a predator who had turned human connection into a weapon, who had destroyed lives for profit and pleasure. But where was Brown now? The answer came from an unlikely source, Brown's own paranoia. Among the documents was a detailed escape plan, complete with false identities, safe houses, and offshore bank accounts. Brown had been preparing for this moment for years, but his preparation had also created a paper trail. One address stood out, a cabin in the mountains, 2 hours north of the city. It was registered under one of Brown's false names, purchased with cash, completely off the books. If Brown was still alive, that's where he'd be hiding. Morrison called Santos from his car as he drove through the dark mountain roads. "I found him, or at least, I found where he should be. Ray, whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. Call the state police. Let them handle it." "And say what? That a retired detective broke into a private office and stole evidence? They'll arrest me before they listen to anything I have to say. Then wait for backup. I can be there in 3 hours." Morrison looked at the clock on his dashboard. 2:47 a.m. By then he could be gone. How many more women have to die while we follow procedure? He hung up and continued driving. The mountain road was narrow and winding, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. Morrison's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating pine trees and steep drops that made him grateful for guardrails. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road, isolated and dark. Morrison parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, his service weapon drawn despite the fact that he no longer had the authority to carry it. Some habits were too ingrained to break. Light flickered through the cabin's windows, the blue glow of a television or computer screen. Morrison circled the building, looking for the best approach. 2 rooms were lit, what appeared to be a living room and a basement accessible through external stairs. Morrison chose the basement. If Brown was destroying evidence or planning his next move, that's where he'd be doing it. The basement door was unlocked. Morrison slipped inside, his weapon ready, and found himself in what could only be described as a command center. Multiple computer monitors displayed news feeds, police scanners, and social media streams. Maps covered the walls, marked with red pins that Morrison realized corresponded to the locations where Brown's victims had lived and died. And there, sitting in front of the largest monitor, was David Brown himself. He turned slowly when Morrison entered, showing no surprise or fear. If anything, he looked relieved. "Detective Morrison, I wondered when you'd figure it out." Morrison kept his weapon trained on Brown but moved closer. "It's over, Brown. I have everything. The files, the recordings, the evidence of what you've been doing." Brown smiled and Morrison felt his skin crawl. There was something fundamentally wrong with the expression, like a mask that didn't quite fit properly. "Do you, though? 'Cause I've been watching you, Detective. Ever since you retired, I've been keeping track of your activities. I know about your conversations with Detective Santos. I know about your late-night visits to crime scenes. I know about your growing obsession with cases that don't add up." Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "You've been watching me. I've been watching everyone involved in my cases. It's how I stay ahead of the game, how I know when someone's getting too close." Brown gestured to the monitors around them. "Did you really think you were the first person to figure out what I was doing?" On one of the screens, Morrison saw surveillance footage of himself entering Brown's office earlier that night. Another screen showed Santos at her desk in the precinct, reviewing files. A third showed the exterior of Morrison's apartment. "The difference between you and the others," Brown continued, "is that you're not going to get the chance to expose me." Morrison tightened his grip on his weapon. "Like you didn't give Sarah Brennan that chance." "Sarah was weak. She got emotional, started making threats. I gave her multiple opportunities to walk away and keep quiet. She chose differently." Brown's voice was completely calm, as if he were discussing the weather. Marcus Wells was convenient, a boyfriend with a record, a history of violence. All I had to do was plant the right evidence and let the system do what it does best. And the other women, how many more were there? Does it matter? They're gone. Their families have moved on. The cases are closed. The only person who can disrupt that is you. Morrison heard footsteps above them, heavy boots on wooden floors. More than one person. Brown's smile widened. "I told you I'd been watching everyone. Did you really think I didn't know Detective Santos was on her way here?" Morrison's blood turned to ice. Santos was walking into a trap, and he was the bait. The sound of gunfire erupted from upstairs. Shouts, crashing furniture, more shots. Morrison moved toward the basement stairs, but Brown's voice stopped him. "I wouldn't if I were you. My associates are very good at what they do. Detective Santos won't be joining us." Morrison felt rage building in his chest like a pressure cooker about to explode. 23 years of chasing justice, of believing in the system, of trusting that good cops could make a difference, and it all came down to this: a sociopath with a computer and enough money to hire killers. "You're going to pay for this," Morrison said. "With what? You have no authority here. Your evidence was obtained illegally. Even if you somehow manage to leave this cabin alive, everything you've discovered will be inadmissible in court. I'll walk free and you'll be the one facing charges for breaking and entering theft and interfering with a police investigation." Morrison realized Brown was right. In his obsession with finding the truth, he'd violated every rule of proper police procedure. His evidence would never hold up in court. Brown would disappear again, find new victims, continue his cycle of manipulation and murder, unless Morrison made a different choice. The gunfire upstairs had stopped. Morrison could hear footsteps approaching the basement door. In a few seconds, Brown's associates would come down those stairs and finish what they'd started upstairs. Morrison made his decision. He emptied his weapons magazine into the computer equipment around Brown, destroying hard drives, monitors, and servers in a shower of sparks and shattered glass. Brown screamed and lunged for him, but Morrison was ready. 23 years of police work had taught him how to handle desperate men. Brown hit the floor hard, Morrison's knee in his back, handcuffs clicking into place. The basement door burst open and two armed men rushed down the stairs, but they stopped when they saw Morrison holding Brown as a human shield. "Your boss is coming with me," Morrison said. "Anyone who wants to argue about it can take it up with the state police, who should be arriving any minute now." It was a bluff, but it worked. The two men looked at each other, unsure of their next move. In that moment of hesitation, Morrison heard the most beautiful sound in the world: sirens approaching through the mountain night. Santos had called for backup before she'd entered the cabin. She was alive, wounded but conscious, when the state police tactical team secured the scene. Brown's associate surrendered without further resistance, probably calculating that loyalty only extended so far when facing life sentences. The evidence Morrison had destroyed in Brown's basement was just the tip of the iceberg. A proper search of the cabin and Brown's various properties revealed a conspiracy that stretched back over a decade, involving dozens of victims and a network of corruption that reached into law enforcement, politics, and high finance. Marcus Wells was released from prison after serving 3 years and 2 months for a crime he didn't commit. The state offered him a settlement that would never truly compensate for what he'd lost, but it was something. Brown was sentenced to life without parole after pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty. Morrison never returned to police work. The case had shown him the dark side of his own obsession with justice, the thin line between doing what was right and doing what was legal. He'd crossed that line to save lives and expose the truth, but he couldn't pretend the cost hadn't been real. Instead, he opened a small private investigation firm, specializing in cold cases and wrongful convictions. Santos joined him after she recovered from her injuries, bringing her skills and her contacts within the police department. On quiet evenings, when the weight of unsolved cases pressed down on his shoulders, Morrison would think about Sarah Brennan and the other women who died because a broken system had failed them. He'd think about Marcus Wells and the years stolen from his life by procedural shortcuts and institutional pressure to close cases quickly. But he'd also think about the dozens of other victims who were alive because Brown was behind bars, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the truth was worth whatever price you had to pay to find it. The manila folder that had started it all still sat on Morrison's desk, but it was no longer a source of sleepless nights. Inside the front cover, he'd taped a photo of Sarah Brennan smiling at the camera, full of life and hope for the future she'd never get to see. It served as a reminder that behind every case file was a human being who deserved justice, even when the system was too broken or too lazy to provide it. And sometimes, Morrison had learned, an old detective with nothing left to lose was exactly what that system needed to remember its purpose.